Chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As always, I'm grateful to Almighty God for this opportunity to once again be in the House, lending my voice to the cause of helping with the empowerment of our people and accepting fully our role as facilitators for the development of the Bahamian people. Yes, Madam Speaker, after all, we are here to help them achieve their dreams and aspirations. Madam Speaker, today we have unanimously on our side indicated our support for this resolution to set up a select committee to examine all matters related to the delivery of proper human rights in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and to join with other countries globally that seek to do the same. Madam Speaker, my colleagues have adequately made the point that we have been on this path before during this sitting and have sought to enlist, to engage the government and to get from them a commitment for us to work in a truly bipartisan way on matters that affect the development of our people. We are clear that that is not a commitment this government is prepared to make. In each case where you have seen a commitment to a bipartisan approach, it has been when the government proposes it, we do an evaluation and we make a determination this is in the best interest of the Bahamian people. Madam Speaker, we listen intently to the statements made relative to the establishment of this select committee. And with very few exceptions on the government side, we did not hear them drill down on the areas of the violation of human rights in the Bahamas and to indicate that the select committee that we are establishing are going to deal with the following violations of human rights in the Bahamas. If you're setting up a select committee, Madam Speaker, you are setting it up with a view of examining the range of issues that affect the lives of the people in our country and how to improve it. And so Madam Speaker, what concerns me is that the government wishes to tick a box, which we believe to be an international obligation, in showing that we are setting up a committee to call for papers, to call for our persons who would talk about the various areas where there's a violation of human rights. However, we did not hear, Madam Speaker, the wide range of areas where we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there are violations of human rights in the Bahamas. And here's a government that's going to enumerate them. In other words, say, here are the areas, and here's what we have been doing, and here is what we are about to do through this committee. And that causes concern, Madam Speaker. And so for a brief while, Madam Speaker, I wish to, as we did on this side, identify some of the challenges that we have so that it is a meaningful discussion. We heard a lot about our history, and we support our history. In fact, the Free National Movement has been a part of helping to chart the course of the empowerment of Bahamians of all ethnicities, but in particular those of African descent. We were a part of that struggle. We contributed to that struggle. And so, Madam Speaker, what we heard from a number of the speakers is a retelling of a familiar but necessary tale of struggle by people who were disenfranchised, whose rights were not observed, who had to fight for their rights and achieved it through decades of struggle. And Madam Speaker, that's a good story. It's a story we should tell as often as we can. But Walter Rodney made an interesting point. He says history is absolutely important and necessary, but history should be secondary to us tackling the present challenges before us. And what this administration is good on is telling that story, but they are challenged when it comes to making the connection between that story and what people expect of us now to do in their defense or in their interest. Because if you are a victim of the violation of human rights and you listen to it today, the question is, did you hear some proposals by this administration that would give you hope that, look here, something is about to happen when eight members join this particular committee? And I would submit, Madam Speaker, that few persons believe the needle is going to be moved based on what they would have heard. So, for example, Madam Speaker, just before I go there specifically, Madam Speaker, there was a bit of history about the formation of the United Nations. When the United Nations were formed, Madam Speaker, and I agree with colleagues, it was formed as an intergovernmental organization. There was a view that the world should not return to what we experienced in World War II. There was a view that we needed to find a way through diplomacy to resolve differences, to head off potential catastrophic events through negotiations and discussions and meeting. Madam Speaker, the United Nations learned very quickly after it was formed as an intergovernmental agency that governments are not the only actors on behalf of its citizens. In other words, they recognized that there were many member countries who had citizens who were underserved or not served at all by their governments. Some because of a scarcity of resources, some because their priorities didn't calculate that they needed to work diligently on behalf of everybody. There were always special interest groups that some governments focus on. And so the United Nations then did an interesting thing that is relevant to what we're discussing. The United Nations then started organizing a series of meetings to allow non-governmental organizations who were targeting groups within various countries so that those underserved communities' needs would be met. And that's how you get all of these NGOs on climate change, because often governments were not the leaders on climate change. They were perpetrators through the industrial plant. Women's issues that were marginalized, and again, many non-governmental organizations emerged with a view of addressing the suffering of the marginalized and disenfranchised people. Young people's issues needed to be mainstreamed, like women's issue, mainstream across societies. And so the United Nations, in its wisdom, permitted a series of global conferences alongside intergovernmental global conferences because many citizens needed to be served, and the only groups that were serving them adequately were non-governmental organizations. I said that all of that, Madam Speaker, to say this, that as we set up this committee, there are many such non-governmental organizations that are out there whose voices need to be heard, who the public has a trust in because they believe that those persons are concerned about the transformation of Bahamian lives, who are on the margins of this society or who have slipped through the cracks in this society. Because unfortunately, many of our citizens have become quite cynical about traditional political organizations, Madam Speaker. And I understand why. That's why, Madam Speaker, I've said about some members on the other side that when they speak, they sound like activists. And no doubt on our side, we probably have the same problem. But when you are in the chair, you're no longer merely an activist. You have the reins of power, and you should try solve some of these problems. So, Madam Speaker, one of the challenges we have in terms of the violation of human rights is the inequality that exists between genders. And I'm only talking about two here, male and female. Madam Speaker, we've missed multiple opportunities as a country to give women the right to pass on citizenship to their children, and unwedded fathers who may have a child overseas to pass on. So we've missed some opportunities, but primarily among Bahamian women, we've missed the opportunity. That's one. We've missed the opportunity, Madam Speaker, and that's both parties, Madam Speaker. We have missed the opportunity to send the clearest possible message in the shortest period of time that violence against girls and women is unacceptable. So here we are today, setting up a committee to examine issues without listing these very serious issues. And one of the reasons the government wouldn't list these very serious issues is because they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity right now to introduce the bills to make the final decisions on these matters, but have decided not to. We have the child protection bill that's on the agenda. We could bring it. One way to show the commitment is to demonstrate a sense of urgency in bringing these matters, Madam Speaker, to bringing them now. And so Madam Speaker, so when you hear the talk about what the intentions are, honestly, Madam Speaker, you have to fight the cynicism, because there is a very real opportunity for members of this government to demonstrate its commitment by bringing the bill. We had the member for West End and Bimini held a consultation for which we applauded him on the issue relative to whether or not a woman could be raped within the context of a marriage. We have other members of the team who sit in the very same cabinet, Madam Speaker, who clearly says, these matters are not a priority for us. The question is, Madam Speaker, whether you decide on whatever terms you're going to use and how you define whether a woman can be violated in the context of marriage, should we not have a broader education campaign and a discussion with the population in a meaningful way with a sense of urgency, given the level of violence that's going on in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? Madam Speaker, girls and women are being killed in this country, are being assaulted in this country. No, this is not new, Madam Speaker, but it's happening now, and it's happening now at an alarming rate. And there is no sense of urgency in this administration that is in charge of coordinating the various stakeholders to address the carnage in general that's happening in our streets, in our homes, in our schools, and the carnage against girls and women. There's a sense of urgency. Madam Speaker. So when we talk about setting up these committees, the question is, will this now spur the kind of action that has long been needed and, in my view, not being dealt with? So when we talk about protecting people's rights, the right to ownership of land, the right to earn a living, to invest in the things that are important to you. Well, Madam Speaker, we have a number of families in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas who've lost their homes through eminent domain, where government seized their property for the reconfiguration of roads. We are giving settlements to all kinds of people who are already wealthy, never lost a day of salary, were embarrassed because we may have made some, and in some cases did make some boneheaded decisions about their relocation. But Madam Speaker, there are some other people who have lost their home, lost their land, and we can't settle them. We won't. Up to today, there are still people waiting for redress. Some people who have unfortunately suffered loss of limb or life in some of our institutions can't be settled. But the connected could be settled. The high profile could be settled. All of these are human rights issues that we refuse to deal with. Madam Speaker, I listened to the member for Long Island, and as he laid out the case for many persons, particularly in the United States, he used examples, but he did cite some examples in the Bahamas, where there are persons who have lost their life or been injured while in custody. And Madam Speaker, we agree, the overwhelming majority of our officers in the various uniform branches are doing a stellar job, are absolutely committed to upholding the law, to detection, to interdiction, to enforcement, to prevention, etc. But Madam Speaker, there are some who have given law enforcement a bad name, and the act of accelerating the work of the coroner's court, accelerating the establishment of a working civilian group that has oversight for the behavior of law enforcement, by accelerating, Madam Speaker, inquiries in matters that stink to high heaven surrounding deaths of young Bahamians. Madam Speaker, the way in which we protect the reputation of the establishment, that is, of the executive, the way we protect the reputation of law enforcement is to lay bare an examination of circumstances surrounding the death of Bahamians. Because what that does is all those that may have conspiracy theories, or those who may have legitimate concerns, or the dots do not connect for them in the circumstances surrounding a loved one's death. We are demonstrating as a society, we are prepared in a very transparent way to look at the matter, to adjudicate it carefully, so that people do not develop deeper mistrust of those who are the gatekeepers of this country. Madam Speaker, there's nothing controversial about that. That's straightforward. It's about helping to clear the name of those of us who sit in here and those out there who are on the front line making sacrifices, leaving their children to defend the rest of the country. But when we fail to act in a transparent way, discuss the circumstances around why somebody died, why they were maimed, we then leave the system up for ridicule and for suspicion, Madam Speaker. And we've had several very high-profile cases, Madam Speaker, recently that we have no logical explanations for. And these are serious matters, Madam Speaker, that we need to address. Madam Speaker, as we have this discussion today, we have a chance to do some real work and to do it at a pace where people believe that we actually care. It is true, Madam Speaker, that we spend more time sometimes trading in insults, and Madam Speaker, and since in sheer numbers is more them than us, in fact, we are often responding. We are responding to the insults than actually collaborating, Madam Speaker, on working on some serious issues that affect us. Madam Speaker, let me go very quickly. I know time is short. Again, as we look at the Bahamas 2021 Human Rights Report that has been put together by our neighbor to the north, let's acknowledge this fact. The United States has a myriad of problems. And Madam Speaker, much like the OECD and a number of the European countries who unfairly put pressure on the financial services community in the Bahamas to comply with regulations they themselves are not complying with. They continue to set up these goalposts for us to hit as a country in terms of financial targets, in terms of our regulatory regime that they themselves are not complying with. Despite that fact, Madam Speaker, we are still duty-bound to do everything possible to make sure that we have a system that is free of resources or monies flowing through it from criminal origins or headed for some other nefarious activity. We still have an obligation, though we take issue with the unlevel playing field in the financial services arena globally. Similarly, Madam Speaker, we often look at with jaundiced eyes at those countries who want to look in and talk about our human rights record when they themselves historically have had a horrible human rights record, even then and in many ways now. And as you look at the United Nations, many of those who joined the committee to look at human rights are some of the countries with the worst record in terms of human rights. But having said all of that, that does not excuse us from doing what we ought to do. So I would have expected that the government, in bringing this resolution, would have come in and identified the list of gaps in our system as it relates to protecting human rights and say, here is what we are determined to do. The detention center, Madam Speaker, is one example. We have long known that it is a facility that's crying out for transformation. It has given this country a black eye over and over and over again. And so it is my hope that in the wrap-up, the government would talk about its willingness to make sure that the commissioners from the OAS, from the Human Rights Division of the OAS, would be invited once again to come to the Bahamas. We should actually demonstrate. Yes, yeah, that's fine, but I will recommend it to you through the public. That's the only way it seemed to make a difference. And so, Madam Speaker, if we are serious about transforming the detention center, why not have the commissioners come in to examine up and down Fox Hill, the corrections facility, the detention center, so that we could clearly demonstrate that we are making progress. It cannot be year after year, it's the same issue. We are spending as a government millions of dollars under both the Progressive Liberal Party administration and the Free National Movement administration, paying attorneys and paying victims who have been trapped in our system, who have not had their matters heard in a timely fashion. Some persons, Madam Speaker, have been kept up to 8 years, some longer, some 7 years, some 5 years, awaiting deportation. We heard the government talk about its victory at the Privy Council recently. If the government wished to be transparent, they would have come and fully explained what occurred at the Privy Council. Instead, they came and I heard them savage an attorney saying that they were focused on getting money, but it was struck down by the Privy Council. They didn't mention that on the matter of law, that the government did not win a case. What the government was successful in doing is making sure that the quantum that was being asked for was not the quantum that they got. I think it was an increase by about $50,000. So.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Freetown.
Misrepresents the effect of the Privy Council decision. The Privy Council, in fact, decided that you could be deported one of 3 ways, only one of them requiring you to be taken to court, and the 2 others requiring you not to go to court, which has in fact reversed a concession wrongly given. So the Privy Council, in fact, found that the minister responsible for immigration can order your deportation without you going to court.
No, Madam Speaker, here's the point. Here's the point, Madam Speaker. The reality is the Progressive Liberal Party, the Free National Movement, under both of our administrations, persons have been held in Fox Hill for an inordinate amount of time. And we have spent tens of millions of dollars compensating people because of the violation of their human rights. And we expected that this administration, in appointing, bringing this resolution, would come and say, that will not happen on our watch. That will not happen on. And so under the Free National Movement's leadership, under my leadership, we will make sure we do not function in that way. We would make sure, Madam Speaker, that these important bills that ought to be brought here to give relief to Bahamians, we'll bring the bills here. We wouldn't be pussyfooting around, Madam Speaker, dilly-dallying on these important provisions. This administration had an opportunity to help thousands of young people have their records expunged for small quantities of marijuana. We're still leaving them out there languishing until the Attorney General, in his supreme wisdom, decide that he's going to bring a bill here to make sure we expunge those records. Wherever it's within our power to bring relief.
The chair recognizes the
Clearly, the member for Marco City did not see me sitting here in the House signing a bunch of expungement.
That's not
for
the
people
point.
For the very same thing. Clearly, he is unaware that the records all come off after 5 years, and in the case of young people, after 2.5 years. Clearly, he is unaware of that.
Madam Speaker, in fact, what the member just said flies in the face of what all of us discussed, including with the member for West End and Bimini, where we know that we have the ability to make a universal decision that all of those persons who have a certain quantity of marijuana for personal use, that we have the ability, that you don't need merely the minister with discretionary power determining who records will be expunged, that it can be done broadly. And we were sure, in this House, members on their feet said, we will bring a bill in order to address that issue when we bring the compendium of bills surrounding marijuana or cannabis. And so, Madam Speaker, I'm just making the point that where we can give relief to Bahamians, we should move quickly, Madam Speaker, to provide the relief. And so Madam Speaker, what we are hoping to hear in the wrap-up is those gaps in our system that exist so that we are able to, what is the government going to do to plug those gaps? Where there is equality in the application of the law. That if somebody, Madam Speaker, if Joe Public is accused of a very serious crime, let's just say hypothetically, assault and rape, that there is a procedure, a process that the government uses to address that particular issue. That should apply then to all citizens in an equal manner. Madam Speaker, right now in this system, depending on who you are and where you sit, the government, it appears, move at a certain pace for one group of people, and another group of people, Madam Speaker, they move at a different pace. Madam Speaker.
Yes. Chair recognizes
I
the honourable
think the
member for
member for
Freetown.
Marco City may not understand the purpose of the committee, which would be to examine
Madam
all
Speaker,
of
this member cannot say what I understand. That in his arrogance, he continues to say it.
I withdraw that absolutely.
In his arrogance, he
so that I
continues
can
to say it.
continue.
He doesn't.
I withdraw that
He had a chance to
absolutely.
speak, Madam Speaker. What is the point of order?
Point of
What is
order, the point of order, if you'd sit down, you'd hear it.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable members, honourable members, honourable members, members,
Mr. Speaker,
members.
That the member for Marco City, having now finished with what he wished to say, the point of order is, Madam Speaker, that the member for Marco City mischaracterizes who is responsible for prosecutions. Contrary to what they have failed to grasp, and in their administration, they don't observe it, the Constitution, which is what we're talking about here, empowers the Commissioner of Police only to deal with that, and not the government. This government doesn't involve itself with prosecutions. They did.
Thank you, honourable member.
Please, 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 please. Madam Speaker, addressing the issue of human rights, addressing the issue of human rights, Madam Speaker, requires a sober, honest discussion with the public. We could say all kinds of things about what we do or do not do. That public out there know what is happening. And it stinks to high heaven, Madam Speaker. I have lived, Madam Speaker, in inner city communities the majority of my life. I know there is an uneven way in which justice in this country is dispensed, Madam Speaker. In fact, Madam Speaker, in every jurisdiction, that's why there's an examination of the system from the point of investigation and arrest all the way through the prosecution. Because there are flaws in the system. There are gaps in the system. Wherever those gaps exist, there are violations of human rights. We should be having a sober, honest conversation about how we are going to fix those gaps. That's a part of it. So they can talk all they want theoretically. The streets know what the reality is. And because the streets no longer trust the system and often don't trust policymakers, that's why you have so much street justice. That isn't justice at all. But it's a carnage of our young people. So they can play as cute as they want. We know that they can influence who's investigated and who's not. That's the view, Madam Speaker. They can deny it all they want. They can deny it all they want. That's their business. That's their business. That's their business. And so, Madam Speaker, we embrace this committee. We embrace this committee, Madam Speaker. But what we want is fair adjudication. We want a setting of a priority list for this particular committee that is serious about examining our system and the gaps in the system and how we might correct the gaps in the system, Madam Speaker. The whole issue of how we treat the detainees is important, Madam Speaker, to show our humanity. Let's just demonstrate that year after year we are improving. We could be tough on crime, but humane in the execution of our job, Madam Speaker. There are blatant cases, Madam Speaker, where it appears to this particular public that certain people, the doors of opportunities are flung wide open, while others are placed on a list that makes it increasingly difficult for them to have their right to an opportunity to earn a living respected and facilitated by the system that they pay taxes into, Madam Speaker. These are human rights issues. It does involve people, Madam Speaker, as was mentioned before, who are disabled, but it also involves people who we deliberately disenfranchise because we don't follow the law in terms of the procurement system. There are people who are locked out of this system depending on who is in power. And this administration, Madam Speaker, can determine who eats and who don't eat.
That's not true.
They determine who eat and who do not eat if you require, or you desire rather, a contract with government. Madam, it is our right. It is our right. It is our right as citizens, if we are playing by the rules, to apply for an opportunity to provide a goods or a service for this system for the Bahamas, the country where we live, and not be blocked because somebody is controlling the levers of power in this country, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, let me say, Madam Speaker, that today we support this committee, but what we do not support is having it appointed as a charade to give this government an opportunity to tick a box to go in the international community and say that we are committed to addressing this. We are saying there are sufficient examples of pieces of legislation that they could have brought already, which would have been emblematic of what they would do through this particular committee, Madam Speaker. So we will participate enthusiastically, Madam Speaker, on the committee. We will have our members serve, but we serve notice. We do not intend to be placeholders on the committee, and we will bring to the public's attention where if this committee does not meet on a regular basis and does not report. We should establish, Madam Speaker, a baseline of the various gaps across our system where there are human rights violations. And year by year, we should track whether or not we are making progress in each of these areas, Madam Speaker. The issues we're dealing with here are issues of life and death. And it is our hope that this government would work vigilantly, diligently in conjunction, not just with us, but also with stakeholders, Madam Speaker, who are committed. Yeah, it's so much our job, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have government officials who are prepared, Madam Speaker, to try and discourage non-governmental organizations from bringing action against the government by discouraging them by saying the costs against you for bringing the action, you're going to pay the cost for the government attorneys and for your own attorneys. And that's a means, Madam Speaker, of not facilitating inquiry, but trying to discourage opposition or inquiry of government officials. And so, Madam Speaker, we support the appointment of this committee, but we do not see in the presentations thus far the government laying out the various issues that have to be addressed and that they intend to address through this committee. Marco City and the Free National Movement, we support the resolution.